The streets of Greenfield were quiet, the kind of Sunday calm that made everything seem just a little more perfect. I eased my car down the familiar tree-lined road, my mind replaying the success of my latest project. It had been one of the most ambitious undertakings of my career. A sprawling commercial complex completed ahead of schedule and under budget. It was a triumph, another milestone in a career I had spent over 2 decades building. As I turned into my driveway, the sight of our house brought a small, satisfied smile to my face. The 2-story colonial, with its perfectly manicured lawn and freshly painted shutters, stood as a testament to everything I had worked for. It wasn't just a house. It was the foundation of my life, the center of my family. Linda's red car was parked neatly in its usual spot, and Eric's sedan sat beside it. Everything seemed in place, just as it always was. I stepped out of the car, grabbing my briefcase. Inside were the contracts for a new business venture, one that would secure our family's future for years to come. I was looking forward to surprising them with the news of my early return. As I walked up the front steps, I noticed the absence of sound. Usually, Sundays were alive with noise. Eric strumming his guitar upstairs, Lily working on her latest art project in the living room. But today the house was silent. I pushed open the door and stepped inside. The familiar scent of Linda's lavender candles greeted me, but something felt off. The quiet wasn't comforting. It was unnerving. I set my briefcase down in the entryway, my footsteps echoing as I moved through the house. As I reached the staircase, I heard Linda's voice from upstairs. First, I thought she might be on the phone. But as I listened, the words she spoke stopped me cold. The paternity test came back. None of the kids are Thomas's. We'll tell him when he's paid for your college tuition. Then take everything. The world around me seemed to tilt. My ears rang as I stood frozen on the stairs, her words replaying in my mind like a broken record. None of the kids are mine. My chest tightened, a cold knot forming in my stomach. I pressed myself against the wall, straining to hear more. We've waited this long, Linda continued, her voice low but clear. Once the house is in my name and we've drained the accounts, we're done. Yeah, a man's voice responded. He's clueless, the perfect provider, too busy with his bridges and buildings to notice what's right in front of him. I recognized the voice instantly. Richard. He had been a presence in our lives for years. A family friend, Linda's confidant, and now her co-conspirator. The realization hit me like a freight train. Linda, the woman I had loved for 2 decades, the mother of my children, had been lying to me. The family I had built my life around wasn't mine. The sacrifices, the late nights at work, the dreams I had nurtured, they were all for a life that didn't exist. My legs felt weak, but I forced myself to stay upright, gripping the banister for support. How long had this been going on? How many times had I sat at the dinner table with Richard, laughing at his jokes, thanking him for his helpful advice, while he betrayed me behind my back? I thought about the kids, Eric, with his quick wit and determination, Lily, with her boundless creativity. They weren't mine. The idea was incomprehensible. I had raised them, loved them, guided them through every triumph and setback. I took a step back, my heart pounding as my mind raced through 1,000 questions. How had I missed this? How had Linda, my wife, been capable of such calculated cruelty? I glanced at my briefcase by the door, the signed contracts inside suddenly meaningless. The future I had been so eager to share with my family had been built on a foundation of lies. I felt a surge of anger rise within me, sharp and hot, but beneath it was something else, grief. Grief for the life I thought I had, for the trust that had been shattered, for the family I had devoted my life to. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to focus. I couldn't confront them now, not yet. I needed time to think, to plan. I needed to know exactly how deep their deception went. Steeling myself, I quietly stepped back outside, the cool air hitting me like a slap. As I stood there, staring at the house that had once been my sanctuary, I made a silent vow. This wasn't over. Linda and Richard thought they had me fooled, but they underestimated me. I didn't spend 20 years designing bridges and buildings without learning how to spot cracks in the foundation. And now I was going to find every single one. My mind wouldn't stop racing. As I sat in the car outside my own home, the pieces of Linda and Richard's betrayal began falling into place with painful clarity. The life I had built, the family I had devoted everything to, wasn't just a lie. It was a carefully constructed facade, designed to hide the cracks beneath the surface. Every late night at work, every business trip I took to provide for my family, had given them the perfect opportunity to weave their web of deceit. Richard, the trusted family doctor, had been a fixture in our lives for years. He was at birthday parties, holidays, and family dinners, always with that easy smile and an unshakable air of confidence. I thought about the times I had thanked him for being such a reliable friend. The nights I had called him for advice about Eric's sprained ankle or Lily's seasonal allergies. And now I knew the truth. While I was building bridges and skyscrapers, he was building something far more sinister right under my nose. The betrayal was staggering, but I couldn't afford to lose control. Not yet. I forced myself to push open the car door and walk into the house. Linda greeted me at the door with her usual warm smile, the kind that used to make the weight of the world feel lighter. Now it only fueled my anger. "How was the trip?" she asked, her voice perfectly casual, as if she hadn't spent the afternoon plotting to dismantle our family. "Good," I replied, my tone neutral. "Got everything wrapped up ahead of schedule." Eric was in the kitchen, picking at his dinner absent-mindedly. He'd been distant lately, more so than usual for a teenager. But now I wondered if he sensed something was wrong. Lily sat at the dining room table, her paints and brushes scattered across the surface, as she worked on her latest masterpiece. "Hey, Dad," she said without looking up, her focus entirely on her canvas. "Hey, sweetheart," I said, ruffling her hair as I walked by. I sat through dinner like nothing had changed, answering Linda's questions about my trip and asking Eric about his classes. I even complimented Lily on her painting, all while feeling the weight of their betrayal pressing down on me like a collapsing bridge. Linda played her part perfectly, chatting about the garden and a PTA meeting she had attended, her voice warm and engaging. But every word she spoke felt like a dagger, twisting deeper with the knowledge of what she had done. After dinner, I retreated to my study, shutting the door behind me. The familiar room, with its walls lined with certificates and awards from my career, felt like a cruel reminder of how blind I had been. I had spent my life preventing failures, anticipating cracks, reinforcing weak points, ensuring stability. Yet here I was, a man whose entire world had crumbled beneath him, blind to the fractures in the very foundation of his family. I sank into the leather chair behind my desk, my gaze falling on the photos scattered across the room. Pictures of family vacations, graduations, birthdays. Each one felt like a taunt, a reminder of what I thought I had but never truly did. I thought about Eric and Lily. How would they feel when they learned the truth? Would they resent me for not seeing the signs, for letting this happen? Would they feel betrayed by Linda and Richard? Or would they cling to the comfort of ignorance? My chest tightened as I thought about the years I had spent pouring everything into our family. I had worked tirelessly to give them a good life, to ensure they had every opportunity. And now I knew that all of it, every late night, every sacrifice, had been exploited. But I wasn't going to let this betrayal break me. Unlike the structures I designed, where my job was to prevent collapse, this was a failure that deserved to come crashing down. Linda and Richard's lies didn't need to be reinforced. They needed to be exposed, dismantled piece by piece until there was nothing left to hide. I pulled out a notebook from my desk drawer and opened it, my hand shaking slightly as I picked up a pen. Step 1. Gather evidence. If Linda and Richard thought they could walk away from this unscathed, they were sorely mistaken. I was going to find every shred of proof I needed to hold them accountable. Step 2. Protect the kids. Eric and Lily didn't deserve to be caught in the crossfire of their mother's betrayal. I would shield them from this as much as possible, even if it meant putting on a brave face while my world burned behind the scenes. Step 3. Take control. This was my life, my family, my future. Linda and Richard had taken enough from me. It was time to reclaim what was mine and ensure that they faced the consequences of their actions. As I stared at the list, a sense of clarity washed over me. The pain was still there, sharp and unrelenting, but it was accompanied by something else, a determination to fight back. This wasn't going to end the way Linda and Richard planned. They thought they had outsmarted me, but they had underestimated the one thing I still had, the ability to rebuild. And this time, I wasn't building for them, I was building for me. The next 2 weeks were a blur of quiet observation and careful planning. Linda had no idea I knew. She went about her days as if nothing had changed, playing the devoted wife with effortless ease. But every smile she offered, every casual question about my day, felt like another knife in the back. I played my role just as well. At the dinner table, I asked about Eric's classes and Lily's art projects, laughed at Linda's stories, and nodded along when she mentioned Richard in passing. Inside, though, I was taking stock of every detail, filing it away for the day this facade would come crashing down. Late at night, when the house was silent, I began digging into our financial records. Years of joint accounts, credit card statements, and investment portfolios spread out before me like a puzzle waiting to be solved. First, I didn't see it. The transactions were small, seemingly insignificant, a few $100s here, 1,000 there. But as I looked closer, a pattern began to emerge. Transfers to an account I didn't recognize. Regular withdrawals just below the threshold that would have flagged them for review. The amounts were deliberate, subtle enough to avoid suspicion but consistent enough to add up over time. Linda had been siphoning money for years, building a nest egg for her and Richard while I worked tirelessly to provide for our family. The level of precision in her actions was chilling. One night, as I stared at the records, my phone buzzed. It was an email from my bank's fraud department. Subject: unusual activity detected in your account. My stomach tightened as I read the message. Acting quickly, I called the fraud hotline and arranged an appointment with Alan, the branch manager who had overseen my accounts for years. The next morning, I walked into the bank, greeted by Alan's familiar, reassuring smile. "Thomas," he said, extending a hand. "It's been a while. What's going on?" "Alan," I replied, shaking his hand. "I think someone's been moving money out of my accounts without my knowledge." He nodded, motioning for me to follow him to his office. As we reviewed the records together, Alan's expression shifted from professional to concerned. "These transfers, they're subtle, but you're right. They're consistent. Whoever's doing this knew what they were doing." "I need to know where the money went," I said firmly. Alan typed rapidly on his computer, pulling up the details. Most of it was moved into an account under Linda's name, but there are also transfers to an account registered to a Richard Henderson. Hearing his name made my blood boil, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Can you print everything?" I asked. "Of course," Alan said, handing me a thick stack of documents a few minutes later. "If you need anything else, just let me know." I thanked him and left the bank, the weight of the evidence in my hands both sobering and empowering. That night, while Linda was in the kitchen preparing dinner, I logged into her email account. It wasn't hard to guess her password. It was the name of our dog, followed by the year we got married. Ironic, really. The inbox was a treasure trove of incriminating messages. Emails between Linda and Richard, discussing their plans in excruciating detail. "We'll wait until Thomas finishes the contracts for the new project. Once the funds are secured, we'll move forward. Richard, don't worry. He's completely clueless. He's so busy working, he doesn't notice anything." I felt my hands tighten into fists as I scrolled through the messages. They talked about their plans for the money, the house, and even my children's futures, as if they were pawns in some twisted game. The next day, I met with Gregory, a divorce attorney who came highly recommended for cases like mine. His office was quiet and understated, a far cry from the chaos swirling in my mind. "Thomas," Gregory said after I laid out everything I had discovered, "this is one of the most calculated betrayals I've seen in my career, but you've done the right thing by documenting everything. Their overconfidence is going to be their downfall. What do we need to do next?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "Keep gathering evidence," he replied. "The more airtight our case is, the less room they'll have to maneuver. We'll also need to file an injunction to freeze any accounts linked to Linda and Richard. That will stop them from draining your assets before we can take legal action." I nodded, feeling a flicker of hope for the first time in weeks. As I walked out of Gregory's office, I felt a sense of clarity. Linda and Richard thought they had outsmarted me, but they had underestimated my ability to adapt, to plan, to fight back. That evening, I sat in my study, the documents spread out before me. The betrayal still stung, but it was no longer paralyzing. It was fuel. My children's futures depended on me. The life I had built wasn't going to be taken from me without a fight. Linda and Richard had played their hand. Now it was my turn. Linda was slipping. I noticed it in the small things at first, her restless glances, the way her phone never left her side, her abrupt departures to take private calls. She had always been composed, her ability to mask her intentions a skill I'd once admired. But now that facade was starting to crack. She was watching me more closely, too, her eyes lingering a little too long during dinner conversations, as if searching for signs that I knew. I played my part perfectly, maintaining the illusion of the oblivious husband, all while counting the moments until her lies would collapse under their own weight. Her growing paranoia only fueled my resolve. The more anxious she became, the more methodical I grew. One evening, I sat in the living room with Eric and Lily, helping Lily sketch out ideas for a school art project, while Eric tapped away on his laptop. Linda paced in the kitchen, her phone pressed to her ear. "Don't worry," I heard her say, her voice low but strained. "We'll figure it out. We might need to move things up." I pretended not to hear, but my ears were finely tuned to every word. Later that night, when the kids were asleep, I waited for the house to settle before slipping out of bed. In my study, I opened a drawer where I had hidden a small recording device I'd purchased earlier that week. If Linda and Richard thought they could continue scheming without consequence, they were wrong. The next day, as I walked into the house after work, I heard Linda's voice from the dining room. "Thomas is starting to act differently," she said. "Do you think he knows?" Richard's voice crackled over the speakerphone. "I don't know," Linda replied, her tone edged with worry. "But we can't take any chances. If he does, we're going to need a backup plan." I stood out of sight, recording every word. "False accusations work," Richard said confidently. "We'll say he's emotionally abusive, paint a picture of a workaholic who neglects his family and lashes out under pressure. Judges eat that up." I clenched my jaw, my grip tightening on the recording device. They were already plotting how to take the children from me, using lies and manipulation to twist the narrative in their favor. "I hate him," Linda spat. "I've spent years pretending, waiting for the right moment. If he tries to fight us, we'll destroy him." Her words felt like a punch to the gut, but I forced myself to remain calm. The anger burning in my chest was tempered by the knowledge that their arrogance would be their undoing. As the days went on, Linda's behavior became more erratic. She avoided prolonged conversations, her answers clipped and her eyes darting nervously. She started staying up late, pacing the house, and making frequent trips to her car. Meanwhile, Richard's professional reputation began to fray. A rumor had started circulating at his clinic, questions about his ethics, murmurs of impropriety. I hadn't expected the cracks in his life to appear so quickly, but it seemed that his arrogance extended beyond our family. One afternoon, Alan from the bank called me with an update. "Thomas," he said, "I thought you'd want to know. Some unusual withdrawals were attempted on the accounts we flagged. We stopped them, of course." "By Linda?" I asked. "Yes," he confirmed. "It looks like she's trying to move money into an offshore account." I thanked him, adding this latest revelation to the growing mountain of evidence. That evening, Linda seemed particularly on edge. "Long day?" I asked as she sat down at the dinner table. "Yeah," she said, avoiding my gaze. "Just a lot on my plate." Eric glanced at her but didn't say anything, his attention shifting back to his phone. Lily, blissfully unaware of the tension, chatted happily about her upcoming art competition. I smiled at her, my heart aching at the thought of how Linda and Richard's lies might one day impact her. But for now, I was determined to shield her from the storm. Later, as I sat in my study reviewing the recordings, the weight of it all began to settle on me. Linda and Richard's confidence was their greatest weakness. They believed they were untouchable, that I would never see through their carefully constructed lies. But they were wrong. The evidence I had gathered was damning. The financial records, the emails, the recorded conversations, it was all coming together. I imagined the moment when their smug certainty would crumble, when the truth would be laid bare for everyone to see. As the week went on, I could feel the moment of revelation drawing closer. Linda and Richard's scheme was unraveling faster than they realized, and I was ready. I had built my career on stability, on identifying cracks before they caused catastrophic failure. And now, as the cracks in their plan widened, I knew the collapse was imminent. All I had to do was wait for the perfect moment. The house was quiet as I sat at the kitchen table that morning, staring at the neatly stacked documents in front of me. Months of planning, nights spent poring over evidence, and countless hours working with Salvador, my attorney, had all led to this moment. The divorce papers were precise, leaving no room for dispute. The financial records, emails, and DNA test results were meticulously organized, each one a nail in the coffin of Linda and Richard's deception. My children's futures were secure, their trust funds established and protected from Linda's reach. I knew she would try to twist the narrative, but this time, the evidence would speak for itself. Linda had no idea that I had anticipated her every move. She still believed she was in control, that her carefully laid plans would go off without a hitch. But the clock had run out. Today was Michael's high school graduation, a day meant to celebrate his hard work and achievements. It was also the day everything would come to light. As I waited for Linda to come downstairs, I thought about the moment I had overheard her and Richard discussing their plan. The cold calculation in her voice, the arrogance in his. It was all fresh in my mind, fueling my resolve. The sound of footsteps on the stairs pulled me from my thoughts. Linda entered the kitchen, her usual polished demeanor intact. But when her eyes landed on the documents in front of me, she froze. "Morning," I said, my tone calm and even. Her gaze darted to the stack of papers. "What's all this?" I slid the DNA test results toward her, my movements deliberate. "Why don't you take a look?" She hesitated, her fingers hovering over the edge of the paper before finally picking it up. I watched as her face shifted, her carefully maintained composure cracking as she read the results. This isn't real," she stammered, her voice trembling. "Oh, it's real," I said, my voice steady. "Just like the financial records showing the money you siphoned out of our accounts. Just like the emails detailing your plans with Richard." Her eyes widened, panic flashing across her face. "Thomas, I can explain." "Don't," I interrupted, my tone sharp. "I've heard enough of your lies." At that moment, Michael walked into the room, his cap and gown draped over his arm, his brow furrowed as he took in the scene. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice filled with confusion. Linda looked at him, her lips trembling as she tried to find the right words. But I spoke first. "Michael," I said, meeting his gaze, "there's something you need to know about your mother." I handed him the DNA test results, watching as he read them. His face went pale, and his hands trembled as he set the paper down on the table. "Mom," he said, his voice breaking, "is this true?" Linda opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. By then, Lily and Samuel had entered the kitchen, drawn by the tension. They looked at Michael, then at me, their expressions a mix of confusion and concern. "What's going on?" Lily asked. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "Your mother has been lying to us. To all of us." I laid out the evidence carefully, explaining everything: the affair, the financial deception, the DNA results. As I spoke, I watched the shock and betrayal wash over their faces. Lily's eyes filled with tears, and Samuel clenched his fists, his jaw tight. "Is this true, Mom?" Lily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Linda looked at her, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't mean for it to happen like this," she said, her voice trembling. "I made mistakes, but I love you." "Don't," Michael said, his tone cold. "Don't you dare try to justify this." The room fell silent, the weight of the truth pressing down on all of us. "I want you all to know something," I said, breaking the silence. "No matter what Linda has done, your futures are secure. The trust funds I've set up for each of you are untouchable. Everything I've worked for, I did for you. That hasn't changed." Lily wiped her eyes, her voice shaky. "Thank you, Dad." Michael looked at me, his expression filled with a mix of gratitude and guilt. "I don't know how you stayed so calm through all of this." "Because I had to," I said simply. "For you." Linda tried to speak again, but I held up a hand. "We're done here," I said firmly. "The papers are ready. The only thing left is for you to sign." Her face crumbled, but I felt no pity. She had made her choices, and now she would face the consequences. As the kids gathered their things to leave for Michael's graduation, I watched them with a mixture of pride and sorrow. The pain of Linda's betrayal would linger, but I knew we would get through it together. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment their lives finally collapsed under the weight of the truth. And as I followed my children out the door, I felt a sense of closure. This was the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. The silence after Michael read the last line of the DNA report was deafening. Linda's face was pale, her carefully constructed facade shattering before my eyes. She opened her mouth to speak, but Michael cut her off, his voice trembling with anger. "Don't," he said, his words sharp. "Don't try to twist this." The kids sat at the dining room table, the stack of documents in front of them. DNA results, financial records, emails, everything they needed to understand the depth of their mother's betrayal. I had written each of them a letter, explaining the situation in a way I hoped they could process. Watching them now, reading my words, I felt both pride and heartbreak. "Is this all true?" Michael demanded, turning to Linda. She hesitated, her eyes darting between the documents and me. I can explain," she said weakly, but the conviction in her voice was gone. "You've had enough time to explain," I said, my tone steady. "And all you've done is lie." Lily clutched her letter to her chest, her tears falling freely. "Why, Mom? Why would you do this to us?" "I didn't mean for it to get this far," Linda stammered, her voice cracking. "I was trying to protect us." "Protect us?" Samuel interrupted, his voice rising. "You were stealing from Dad. You were planning to take everything and leave us with nothing." Linda's hands trembled as she reached for the stack of papers, but I was quicker, pulling them away before she could grab them. "Don't bother," I said. "Everything here has been copied and secured. Even if you destroy these, it won't change a thing." Her expression shifted, anger flashing across her face. "You're trying to turn them against me," she said, her voice venomous. "You turned them against yourself," I replied coldly. "Every lie, every dollar you stole, every email you sent to Richard. This is all on you." As the confrontation continued, Linda grew more desperate. She turned to Michael, trying to appeal to him directly. "Michael, please," she said, her tone pleading. "You have to understand. I was doing this for us, for the family." Michael shook his head, his expression one of disbelief. "No, Mom. You were doing this for yourself." Her attempts to regain control faltered as the truth sank in. The kids had seen the evidence, read my letters, and heard her failed attempts to justify her actions. There was no room for manipulation anymore. "You thought you could control everything," I said, standing across from her. "You thought you could lie and steal without consequence. But you underestimated me." As I spoke, the doorbell rang. I glanced at Linda, her face twisting in confusion. "That'll be Gregory," I said, walking to the door. Gregory entered, a leather briefcase in hand and a calm, professional demeanor that belied the storm brewing in the room. He nodded at me before addressing Linda. "Mrs. Green," he said, setting the briefcase on the table. These documents finalize the divorce proceedings. You'll find that all assets have been accounted for and secured under Mr. Green's name, including the house and the trust funds for the children. Linda's eyes widened in shock. "You can't do this," she said, her voice trembling. "You did this to yourself," Gregory replied evenly. "The evidence against you is overwhelming. Any attempt to contest this will only hurt your position further." She sank into a chair, her hands shaking. "Richard will." "Richard won't be helping you," I interrupted. "His own career is in shambles. His reputation is ruined, and the clinic has opened an internal investigation into his finances. You and Richard? You're both done." For the first time, Linda looked truly defeated. The arrogance and defiance that had carried her through months of deception were gone, replaced by the weight of the consequences she now faced. "Thomas," she said softly, tears streaming down her face, "I made mistakes. Please, let's talk about this." I shook my head, my voice firm. "You had every opportunity to come clean, Linda. You chose to lie, to steal, to betray the family we built. There's nothing left to talk about." The kids sat silently, their expressions a mix of anger, sadness, and disbelief. "Everything's going to be okay," I said, turning to them. "I've made sure of that. Your futures are secure, and nothing she's done will change that." They nodded, their trust in me unshaken despite the chaos around us. Linda tried one last time to salvage the situation, but the reality was undeniable. The house was no longer hers, the assets she had planned to take were protected, and the lies she had spun had unraveled completely. As Gregory packed up the documents, I felt a sense of finality. This was the end of Linda and Richard's scheme, the moment their arrogance and deceit finally caught up with them. The kids and I would move forward, stronger and closer than ever. And Linda would be left to face the consequences of her actions, alone. The days following the confrontation felt surreal. For so long, I had prepared for that moment, every detail meticulously planned, every outcome anticipated. Now that it was behind me, I felt a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. Salvador handled the legalities with precision, ensuring that everything went exactly as planned. The divorce was finalized quickly, thanks to the mountain of evidence I had collected. Linda's attempts to fight back were futile. The documents, recordings, and financial records left no room for doubt. In the end, Linda was left with nothing but the consequences of her actions. Her social circle, once so carefully cultivated, evaporated almost overnight. The people she had surrounded herself with were quick to distance themselves when her lies came to light. Without access to the assets she had hoped to claim, her financial status deteriorated rapidly. Richard's downfall was just as swift. The investigation into his unethical practices at the clinic revealed years of misconduct. His medical license was revoked, and his reputation was destroyed. Whatever plans he and Linda had for a future together were now nothing more than ashes. Meanwhile, my life moved forward. I relocated to a new city, a fresh start that felt like a long overdue change. My firm expanded its operations, and I found myself thriving in ways I hadn't imagined. The projects were bigger, the challenges more rewarding, and my reputation as a structural engineer remained untarnished. But the most important part of my life wasn't my career, it was my children. Michael decided to pursue law, inspired by the events that had unfolded. Watching him throw himself into his studies, determined to make a difference, filled me with pride. His dedication and sharp mind were a force to be reckoned with, and I knew he would go far. Lily's artistic talent blossomed, her work gaining recognition in galleries across the country. She poured her emotions into her paintings, creating pieces that were vibrant, raw, and deeply moving. Seeing her passion turn into a successful career was one of the greatest joys of my life. Samuel surprised me the most. His knack for technology, which had always been a hobby, evolved into something extraordinary. He built a tech company from the ground up, developing innovative solutions that attracted investors and customers alike. His success was a testament to his resilience and determination. Through it all, our bond as a family grew stronger. We had weathered the storm together, and the scars of betrayal, while still present, had become a reminder of what we had overcome. The kids saw firsthand the consequences of dishonesty and the strength it took to stand up to deceit. They respected the choices I had made and the way I had handled everything, and their trust in me never wavered. One evening, as we gathered for dinner in our new home, I looked around the table and felt a deep sense of gratitude. "You've all come so far," I said, my voice filled with emotion. "I couldn't be prouder of the people you've become." Michael smiled, raising his glass. "We wouldn't be here without you, Dad." Lily nodded, her eyes shining. "You showed us what it means to stand up for what's right. And how to rebuild after everything falls apart," Samuel added. Their words stayed with me long after the meal ended. Looking back, I realized that the betrayal I had faced, as painful as it was, had been a turning point. It had forced me to reevaluate my life, to confront hard truths, and to rebuild something stronger. My children were thriving. My career was flourishing. And most importantly, I had found peace. The past would always be a part of our story, but it no longer defined us. We had built a new life, one grounded in integrity, resilience, and the unwavering strength of our bond as a family. Standing on the balcony of my office, I looked out over the city skyline. Each building, each bridge, was a reminder of a life built with care, precision, and purpose. But as I stood there, I knew that my greatest creation wasn't the structures I had designed. It was the family I had rebuilt. Years had passed since the day Linda's lies came crashing down. In that time, my life had flourished in ways I hadn't thought possible. My firm had grown into a powerhouse, expanding into multiple cities and earning accolades for its innovative designs. My name had become synonymous with integrity, a reputation forged not only in my work but in how I had handled the darkest chapter of my life. Linda, on the other hand, was a shadow of the woman she once pretended to be. She worked in a small retail store, her once polished image tarnished beyond repair. The friends who had surrounded her during our marriage were gone, their loyalty as fleeting as her facade. As for Richard, his days as a respected doctor were long over. His medical license had been permanently revoked, and the clinic he had once run was now a cautionary tale of what happens when arrogance overshadows ethics. He spent his time offering low-level consultations, a far cry from the influential position he once held. The consequences of their actions had been swift and unforgiving. But my focus wasn't on them, it was on my children. Michael had grown into a sharp, compassionate lawyer, using his talents to fight for truth and justice. Watching him argue cases and stand up for those who couldn't defend themselves filled me with a pride I couldn't put into words. Lily's art had transcended anything I could have imagined. Her work was showcased in galleries worldwide, her pieces celebrated for their vibrant emotions and raw honesty. She had taken the pain of the past and turned it into something breathtakingly beautiful. Samuel's company was a marvel of innovation, his creations transforming industries and improving lives. He had become a leader in his field, his humility and brilliance a perfect balance. They had each built lives rooted in integrity, resilience, and love, values that had carried us through the hardest times and shaped who we had become. Linda had tried to reconnect with them over the years, sending letters and messages filled with apologies and attempts at explanations. But my children were steadfast. They understood the damage she had done, and while they didn't hate her, they had no desire to reopen old wounds. "Family is about more than blood," Michael had said to me once. "It's about trust." And she broke that. He was right. The lessons I had worked so hard to teach them, about honesty, perseverance, and the importance of building something real, had taken root. One evening, as we gathered for a family dinner in the new house, the atmosphere was filled with warmth and laughter. Lily was recounting a story about her latest gallery opening. Michael was teasing Samuel about his recent interview on a tech podcast, and I sat back, taking it all in. "Dad," Michael said, raising his glass. "To you." "To me?" I asked, surprised. He nodded. "For showing us what strength really looks like. For proving that integrity wins in the end." The others joined in, their glasses clinking together in a toast that carried more weight than any words could. That night, as I sat alone in my study, I thought about how far we had come. The pain of Linda's betrayal would always be a part of our story, but it didn't define us. We were defined by what we had built from the rubble. A life filled with love, truth, and purpose. Looking back, I realized that my greatest triumph wasn't in the buildings I had designed or the awards I had won. It was in the family I had raised, the lives I had touched, and the legacy of integrity I would leave behind. As I turned off the light and stepped out onto the balcony one last time, the city below seemed to shine a little brighter. This was my life, rebuilt, restored, and stronger than ever.